Welcome back into another episode, Spaceman 2.0 Phoenix Truth Rising Show. Here to help you grow in the knowledge and wisdom of truth, and the truth will set you free. With the best history lesson and spiritual insights on the planet, exposure of the Illuminati's plan of world conquest and control is the death knell to the New World Order. So we're getting right back into Divine Plan Volume 2, talking about Nebuchadnezzar's dream, Daniel's interpretation. We just went over a bit more about the first kingdom. The first empire was like a lion, okay, and that was, I believe, the Babylonian. Then we have the second kingdom, which is like a bear, and it's raised itself up on one side. It's called the Medo-Persian Empire, and one side was more greater than the other. And now we're going to get into the third empire and what that's about with the Alexander the Great and what he conquered. So the second kingdom conquered and absorbed three great empires, Assyria, Babylon, and Egypt. For identification here is unmistakable. It also proves the identity of the Khazars, as we have given you over and over again. The third empire, the third beast that came up out of the sea of these Enosh peoples, was like a leopard. And remember, Enosh or Enash, a Chaldean word for non-Israel peoples, was like a leopard, and certainly you could not have taken a better symbol with its swift, striking, terrible power. It says it had 4 wings and 4 heads. In other words, already, while it was still a single empire under Alexander, it had in it the seeds of this breakup into 4 parts, and dominion was given onto it. Yes, dominion it certainly had. Alexander conquered all that the previous empires had ruled. He occupied and conquered Egypt. Then he went on to take over all that the empires of Assyria, Babylon, and Medo-Persia had ruled, including portions of northern India. Finally, there was the fourth one, a beast that was dreadful, terrible, strong, exceedingly, and he would devour the whole earth. Well, it covered all the then known world, all that was civilized, enough to be known at that time. All but the easternmost portion of the earlier empire. Rome didn't penetrate into Afghanistan, or as they called it, Bactria then, or Egypt, but it had everything west of that. Rome also had what the other empires had never had. It had all of Europe except Germany. It had northern Africa, but was excluded from all the principal lands then occupied by the people of Israel. It only overran England, where the Israel people were as yet very few in number, because the bulk of the Israel people had not come into England. There was just a tiny handful there, before the withdrawal of the Roman legions. Now there's an important sentence in the last paragraph. It had northern Africa, but was excluded from all the principal lands then occupied by the people of Israel. Remember Carthage? And you'll go into there. They actually went into there with the Arab Spring takeover of Libya and Tusalia and all that. And they went into Carthage and destroyed all of the artifacts and history that there was ever blood sacrificing by the Israel people there back in the day to Moloch, bloodletting. That was, I think, 2015. And they took out Gaddafi, which he went to the same academy as Prince William. So if that doesn't say anything, they're all part of the same clique. He said that this beast would break into pieces. Let's just start again. He said that this beast would break in pieces and devour all things. Remember, Daniel 2 verse 40 says, "The fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron. For as much as iron breaks in pieces and subdues all things, as iron that breaks all these, shall it break in pieces and bruise." Then Daniel said this fourth beast was diverse, or different from all that went before it. It originated as a republic. Now remember, while republics were known in Greece before this time, there were small cities. They were not great empires. This is the first time in all history that you had a republic rising to the power of a conquering empire. As a kingdom, Rome kept its identity and force after the death of even its most powerful kings. The others tended to weaken and sometimes even break up when a great and powerful king died. But in Rome, you had a continuity of the empire as such for these many centuries. This next vision now obviously concerns the same 4 empires, but now you have a tie-in with the book of Revelation, because you have these 4 beasts rising out of the sea. As we shall note when we get to the book of Revelation, where John was given a vision, it was one beast which rose out of the sea, but the one beast combined in itself the characteristics of the first 4. So obviously you have a connection there which cannot be overlooked. By way of more confirmation of this order, in the 8th chapter of Daniel, he was given another vision of a ram and a goat. He said, Then I lifted up mine eyes, and saw, and behold, there stood before the river a ram which had 2 horns, and the 2 horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher came up last. I saw the ram pushing westward and northward and southward, so that no beasts might stand before him, neither was there any that could devour out of his hand, but he did according to his will, and became great. And as I was considering, behold, and the goat came from the west on the face of the whole earth, and touched not the ground, and the goat had a notable horn between his eyes. And he came to the ram that had 2 horns, which I had seen standing before the river, and ran into him in the fury of his power. And I saw him come close unto the ram, and he was moved with anger against him, and broke his 2 horns. And there was no power in the ram to stand before him. But he cast him down to the ground and stamped upon him, and there was none that could deliver the ram out of his hand. Therefore the he-goat waxed very great, and when he was strong, the great horn was broken, and for it came up 4 notable ones toward the 4 winds of heaven. Daniel 3-8. So the angel gives him the explanation of this. Now remember, this is prophecy before it happened. This is while Babylon was still at the apex of its power. The angel says, The ram which thou sawest, having 2 horns, are the kings of Media and Persia, and the rough goat is the king of Grecia, and the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king. Now that being broken, whereas 4 stood up for it, 4 kingdoms shall stand up out of the nation, but not in his power. Daniel 8:20-22. This was written sometime in the middle third of the 500s BC to 545, somewhere in there. And the fall of Babylon did not come until about 538 BC. So this was 2 centuries before the rise of Alexander the Great. Note again the accuracy of prophecy. The ram had 2 horns, Media and Persia. Both were high, but one was higher, and the higher one came up last. Persia was the one that came to power later, absorbing Media. Concerning the rough goat, the cultured Greeks despised all Macedonians as being barbarians. Of course, the Greeks despised absolutely everybody else in the world as being barbarians, because they recognized only 2 classes, Greeks and barbarians. Sounds like Netanyahu, eh? He calls everyone else barbarians. Anyways, the Greeks looked down upon the Macedonians, maybe more than some of the others, because these were a rough, tough bunch. And when he was strong, the great horn was broken. Alexander died at the very height of his power, 323 BC. So back to the Greeks saying everyone else is barbarians. Well, we all know the Khazarians are the true barbarians, and they took on the Judean religion in 740 AD. And they still maintain their barbarian way, and usually the evil one calls the innocent victim the same thing that they're doing onto them, just to scapegoat it. You remember in the earlier vision of the 4 beasts that came out of the sea, Alexander had been compared there to a leopard. I take this that I am going to read now from the History of Nations published by P.F. Collier and Sons. Alexander was one of the generals who won by rapid strokes and daring expedients. His long marches were perhaps the most characteristic part of his career. Urged on by him, his army seemed to be able to annihilate time and space. The rapidity of their motion was almost incredible. He was on the spot when his enemies believed him to be still hundreds of miles away, and when once arrived, Alexander had an eagle eye for seizing the moment to strike. He hardly ever made a mistake. His attacks, however reckless, succeeded to a miracle. So Alexander is compared to the leopard. The leopard is not a big animal. It is terrifically strong for its size. It is extremely fast, and it makes its attacks in just that way. Now, 4 kingdoms shall stand up out of the nation, but not in his power. All the members of the family of Alexander the Great were assassinated in the struggle for power. Egypt was taken over by his general, Ptolemy I. Thrace, the old Macedonia, and Greece was taken over by Lysimachus. Syria and Asia Minor went to Antigonus, and Cappadocia and Paphlagonia, which were eastern Turkey, and the areas inland to the south of it, went to Eumenes. And it says, not in his power. That is, it was not an ordinary division of the empire, but each quarter was simply seized by the local commander as his own independent act. So the accuracy of Daniel's vision here is beyond question. Now we are beginning to get into what the symbolism of this thing must in probability mean. Let us turn now to the 12th chapter of Revelation, Revelation 12, 1-5. And there appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and upon her a head a crown of 12 stars. And she being with child cried, travailing in birth, and pain to be delivered. And there appeared another wonder in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 crowns upon his heads. And his tail drew the 3rd part of the stars of heaven, and did cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman, which was ready to be delivered, for to devour her child as soon as it was born. And she brought forth a man-child, who was to rule all nations, with a rod of iron. And her child was caught up unto God, and to his throne. That woman unquestionably is Israel, because you have here a repetition of Joseph's dream. Back in the book of Genesis, it says this about Joseph, and he dreamed yet another dream, and told it to his brethren, and said, Behold, I have dreamed a dream more, and behold, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars made obeisance to me. And he told it to his father and to his brethren, and his father rebuked him, and said unto him, What is this dream that thou hast dreamed? Shall I and thy mother and thy brethren indeed come to bow down ourselves to thee, to the earth? And his brethren envied him, but his father observed the saying. Genesis 37, 9, 11. The sun and the moon obviously represented Joseph's father, Israel, and his mother, 11 stars, of course, Joseph himself being the 12th. So now you have a woman clothed with the sun, the moon under her feet, upon her head a crown of 12 stars, and probably talking about Israel. Then you read in Revelation 12:2 that the woman was about to give birth to a child, and it says in Revelation 2:5, who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron, a child who was caught up to the throne of God. Of course, that child, it would seem, who was to rule all nations is most likely the Christed child you call Jesus, Jesus. He was born, of course, as we are reminded by Paul. He came, as far as the flesh is concerned, of the place recognized as Israel, of the tribe from that area. And so far as ruling all nations, we read in Revelation 19, verses 11, 15, and 16, And I saw heaven opened, and behold, a white horse, and he that sat upon him was called Faithful and True, and in righteousness he doth judge and make war. And out of his mouth goeth a sharp sword, and with it he should smite the nations, and he shall rule them with a rod of iron, and wrath of Almighty God. And he has on his vesture and on his thigh a name written,